listener production.
Hello, Katrina Blowers with you. Welcome to The Briefing. Earlier this year, students across the world began protesting Israel's murder of defenceless Palestinian citizens in Gaza. Students at the Uni of Melbourne negotiated to leave the campus on a promise that the uni would disclose its ties to weapons companies within a month of ending the encampment. They left, and months later, the uni complied. Now, 21 students face disciplinary hearings and might be kicked out.
I'm very confident that we were doing the right thing and that we were protesting a very just cause, protesting for human lives, the lives of men, women and children, of the elderly, of my fellow healthcare professionals that are being targeted in this genocide.
To make matters worse, the uni has used CCTV footage and Wi-Fi data to bolster its case against the students, despite saying in 2016 it wouldn't. Our briefing topic today explains where all this is at. Antoinette is in with us for that in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines of the day with Simon Beaton. It is Thursday, July 11.
Hi, Katrina. Pressure is continuing to mount for Biden to drop out of the election.
It's up to the president to decide if he is going to run. We're all encouraging him to make that decision because time is running short.
That was Nancy Pelosi, the former House Speaker and a longtime ally of Biden. And it's a significant comment as it really ignores Biden's insistence that he's committed to running for re-election, which he's said again and again. Also, Hollywood actor George Clooney, who is a massive fundraiser for the Democrats and is incredibly influential, has also published a piece in the New York Times titled, "I love Joe Biden, but we need a new nominee."
Gosh, surely now that Nancy Pelosi, who is the most senior Democratic figure yet to speak out against Biden running again, and George Clooney is a Hollywood actor, but to go to the trouble of writing an opinion piece, and in it he says he spoke to Biden at a party just recently, and it was the same kind of older type of person that we saw in the debate. He said it was that same person that he spoke to at a party, and it certainly wasn't the Joe Biden of 10 or 20 years ago. Something's got to give here. And also, we've got that wild video footage that has popped up on TMZ of George Stephanopoulos, who is the reporter or anchor who interviewed Joe Biden in the exclusive sit-down just a few days ago. He was kind of approached on the street by, well, not really a random pedestrian, I don't think, and recorded saying that he doesn't think that he should run either.
Yeah, it's all happening, and it's also having effects outside of the US, in particular with the prospect that what if Trump were to be re-elected? So there's a summit in Washington at the moment between NATO, and a large focus is being placed on Ukraine. The US and NATO allies have all agreed that Ukraine should have an irreversible path into the alliance. And it's likely that we'll see that agreement formalised before the end of the week. So part of that is that they're trying to make sure that if Trump does get back in, that Ukraine will have support.
Well, meth, cocaine and nicotine are at near record highs across Australia, according to the latest wastewater report. So this report is done periodically by the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, and it looks at the levels of 12 different drugs across 56 different sites, measuring what's in our wastewater, both in our capital cities but also regionally. So it gives you a pretty good snapshot of what's happening. A couple of stats that have come out. Meth had significantly high use in Queensland, South Australia and WA, while cocaine and MDMA are particularly high in Sydney. Really interestingly, ketamine use was highest in Hobart. Alcohol was up in the Northern Territory.
Yeah, and disturbingly, Australia had the second highest use of meth per person next to the US, while our country's use of meth, cocaine, MDMA, MDA, ketamine, alcohol and nicotine have all increased. Finally, Katrina, any guesses on what our most popular drug was overall?
I thought it was cocaine, but I think it's changed now. Am I right?
You are. It's cannabis, which I don't know. I don't find that surprising. It is the most used illicit drug. though its use has decreased since the last report.
What I found really interesting too, looking at the global figures, was that the Netherlands kind of comes out on top when it comes to cannabis. Probably not a big surprise to anyone, but it is also the country with the highest use of cocaine in the world. So,
really?
Yeah, they're really embracing the philosophy of uppers and downers. Well, just hours before he was set to play against Novak Djokovic in the Wimbledon quarterfinal, Alex de Minaur has pulled out of the competition. The Australian tennis star heard a loud crack coming from his hip, and he also had a fair bit of pain in his last match. Despite being optimistic he'd be able to continue in the tournament, he's now had confirmation it is a significant injury. He is a very dejected de Minaur after announcing the news.
Well, it's no secret that this, at this stage of my career, was the biggest match of my career, right? So wanted to do anything I could to play.
Recovery time for this injury is expected to be 3 to 6 weeks. Sadly, that also adds doubt for the Paris Olympics.
And finally, Hobart's Museum of Old and New Art, also known as MONA, has come clean and admitted the Picassos they put in the women's toilet cubicle were in fact a fake. The wife of MONA's millionaire owner has fessed up to painting the 3 pieces, Kirsha Cashel writing on her blog she had waited patiently 3 years and 7 months to be exact, to be exposed for faking the artworks, and had to make the admission publicly due to inquiries from a journalist and the Picasso administration in France. So this all comes after Mona was taken to court for discrimination when it set up its so-called ladies' lounge, and the court ruled they had to let men in. The gallery then hung the Picassos in the toilet, describing it as an exhibition for ladies only. We don't know what the Picasso administration thinks of all of this yet. The other part is Cashel has admitted other pieces in the ladies' lounge aren't genuine either, including antiques and a rug that was said to once belong to Queen Mary of Denmark. Katrina, have you been to MONA?
I have been to MONA, and this makes me laugh because now I think, was it all a giant ruse? And then I think, well, what is art anyway? You know, that's a fairly existential question, isn't it? Does it need to be real in order for you to appreciate it in the true artistic sense? I don't know, Simon, so many questions.
I went to MONA a few years ago with my wife, and she went into that ladies only section and I didn't. And at the time, I was pretty annoyed. I wanted to see what I thought were real Picassos. But afterwards, I realised that my anger was part of the art, right? So I kind of get it. And I think this whole thing that the whole thing is quite ridiculous, but on par for MONA. Love it.
Yes. Oh, and I should mention before we wrap up the headlines that we put out a poll yesterday on the back of our episode about your thoughts on whether sex work should remain on the NDIS. Our poll showed over 4 times as many of you supported sex work being part of the NDIS compared to those who didn't. So thank you guys for jumping in on that one. If you missed that chat, you can find the app in the feed. We really do want to hear all of your opinions. And to get involved, you can join our community channel Behind the Briefing on Instagram and keep an eye on Spotify, where we also publish our polls. That is it from us. Antoinette is about to jump back in for today's briefing on the disciplinary hearings involving Melbourne's uni student protesters.
Hi, it's Antoinette Lattouf with you for this episode of The Briefing. In April and May this year, we all saw footage of students across the world protesting against Israel's ongoing murder of defenceless Palestinian citizens, particularly women and children. And in response, encampments were established at university campuses, firstly across the US, but also here in Australia, in cities like Sydney, Adelaide, Brisbane and Melbourne. At the University of Melbourne, students staged a sit-in as well as an encampment in a building that they took over, refusing to leave until the University of Melbourne agreed it would disclose any links to weapons manufacturers, many of whom provide weapons being used by the Israeli Defence Force. A month ago, the university came to an agreement with protesters about disclosure, and the encampment was packed up and the students left. Since then, it's been revealed the university tracked 21 students who had entered the Arts West building to conduct that 7-day sit-in. The university reportedly used Wi-Fi data and CCTV against the students who now face disciplinary hearings, which kick off today. And that's despite the uni pledging when the technology was introduced back in 2016 that it wouldn't be used against students. I'm joined by Kareem Zaghlul, who is a postgraduate medical student nearing the end of his degree, and Zara Chauvin-Cunningham, who's a second-year science student and is also Jewish. These two could both be kicked out of uni after these hearings. Firstly, Kareem, you're nearing the end of your medical degree, which could be in jeopardy because you were protesting the murder of children and defenceless citizens. How does that sit with you, given you're in the business of saving lives?
I think it's absurd that this is a possibility. It would be a shame for a system that desperately requires doctors and people that care about humanity to lose a potential doctor. I'm very confident that we were doing the right thing and that we were protesting a very just cause, protesting for, as you said, human lives, the lives of men, women and children, of the elderly, of my fellow healthcare professionals that are being targeted in this genocide.
And Zara, tell me a little bit about yourself and the role you played in the encampment.
I was just one of many participants in the sit-in and the encampment. I was inspired to be more active in the movement from Dana, a Palestinian woman at the university, leading a die-in a couple months ago at the university in which she got us to sit down and read out the names of the Palestinian children who hadn't made it to their first birthday since October 7th. And just reading out the names of the 0-year-olds took a very, very long time. And Dana really, I think she brought in a lot of people by getting us to face the realities of what's happening in Gaza. So I've just been doing whatever I can to show solidarity and support as a Jewish woman and just as a student at the university.
You both took in what was called the Mahmoud's Hall sit-in. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there was some criticism that by taking over a building, that it's disruptive to classes, it's intimidating to other students. What's your response to those criticisms?
I wouldn't shy away from saying that it was disruptive, and I think that during an act of genocide, I think that it's warranted, especially when the university has been so non-receptive to hearing its students' and staff's demands of our involvement and complicity in the genocide.
Yeah, I completely agree. Protests are not meant to be inconspicuous. We need to make noise.
In making that noise, in making the university uncomfortable, there were also reports that Jewish students felt unsafe. Zara, I'm going to ask you your opinion on that and what you witnessed regarding that.
There's a difference between feeling uncomfortable and actually being unsafe. And I think that any of those Jewish students, and there were quite a lot of them, that took the time to actually enter our spaces and come to the camp and come to the hall, immediately were confronted with the fact that a lot of that representation is a lie. Because in the space we had big banners for Jewish students for Palestine. We held Shabbat at the camp and in the hall. I stayed there the whole time and I was very comfortable. My Jewish grandmother visited, and even some of the students who I think were supposedly uncomfortable, Zionist students, they were coming very often to engage with us and clearly felt comfortable and safe to enter the space. They had no fear of us.
So the encampment ended about a month ago and there was an agreement reached about disclosure with the university. What was that agreement and did that feel like a win?
The university's reluctance to accept any of the demands that we had prior to these, as I like to call them, more disruptive protests, is what necessitated that level of protest. And what we were calling for and what was in the end agreed upon by the university is to disclose the nature of the funding and the partnerships with these weapons manufacturers. So, for example, several of the largest weapons manufacturers in the world, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, BAE Systems, Rosebank Engineering, all of these companies have, I'll say, quite intimate ties with the university, and they provide funding for research. And the nature of that research was confidential. And so what this disclosure achieved was finding out what those research outputs are. Where is this money going? And what is it going towards?
So have you received any of that information yet?
We have received some disclosure. The university's published a page which lists millions of dollars of ties to these companies.
As well as the US Department of Defense.
Yeah, but it's not a comprehensive list.
Yes, and a lot of critical information is omitted, including timeframes of these partnerships and the contracts, and it's not anywhere near the level of detail that we thought that we were agreeing to in these negotiations, which is disappointing.
So then around 20 students, including the two of you, received emails from the university which also captured images of you in Mahmoud's hall. What was that like, receiving that and being told, we see you and now you need to front a hearing about your future with the university?
I personally found it very surprising and in very poor taste of the university to release it, especially when and how they did. I think the evidence brought against us is very, frankly, creepy, and it made me really uncomfortable to know that the university is either employing people to comb footage for my face and trying to watch my life while I'm sitting in this building, or they are weaponizing the AI technology that they've developed with weapons companies. But either option feels very uncomfortable as a student. The whole atmosphere of the political trials and these sanctions feel like the university is setting themselves in opposition against us and kind of isolating us as their own students. And I found it very uncomfortable.
Karim, what about you? And what are you told the possible outcomes could be as a result of these hearings?
The outcomes are numerous. They range from as simple as a warning or a caution to a fine, to being banned from certain areas on campus or using certain services like the library, all the way to enrollment consequences such as expulsion or suspension, which would be devastating for me personally, but for all of us really. But yeah, as I said earlier, I feel that I acted in a way that is in accordance with the university's own values, in accordance with the values that the medical school constantly espouses, values of empathy, values of human rights, values of, standing your ground for what you believe in. Historically, universities are meant to be institutions for high thinking, cultivating critical thought.
Yeah, but I will push back on that as well, because historically, you go into this knowing that encampments and student protests at universities, while some being effective, at times they have resulted in severe punishment, in some cases in the 60s with the Vietnam War, leading to imprisonment. So did you go into this eyes wide open?
We knew the consequences. We knew the risks going into protesting like this. However, we were very firm in maintaining a peaceful nature to these protests. Yes, as we discussed earlier, these protests may have been seen as disruptive, and we're meant to disrupt. That's how, like we said, that's how we get the university's attention. However, I don't think that level of disruption compares to the disruption of, say, my fellow medical students in Gaza.
Zara, your hearing is hours away. I want to understand how you're feeling right now. Like, describe that feeling, whether it's, in your tummy or it's impacting your breathing. How are your senses and your body responding to what's to come?
Honestly, very anxious. I feel a pit in my stomach, and I think that's shared by all the students going into this. It's a very difficult set of proceedings to go through, and it feels very punitive from the university regardless of the outcome. The consequences may be very serious and it feels horrible, to be honest, but it's leveled as well with the fact that the university is trying to punish us for entering buildings on campus, being in them, studying in them, protesting peacefully in them. The evidence they've brought against us is photos of us standing and using Wi-Fi. So it feels very difficult, but also just very silly for the university to have done this.
The Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner is now investigating if your privacy and your fellow students' privacy was breached. Is that of any comfort to you?
Yes, I wouldn't use the word comforting, but I do think it's necessary. I think it's relieving that this state agency, this external body that we didn't even reach out to, has taken it upon themselves to investigate this, because I do believe it is quite a serious violation, and it has shaken us all up. I would say it's been very disturbing to feel surveilled to this extent in this way. So yeah, it definitely needs to be looked into incredibly seriously.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Zara and Kareem, and all the best with your disciplinary hearings. Be in touch and good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was Kareem Zaghloul and Zara Chauvin-Cunningham, both students at the University of Melbourne. We reached out to the Office of the Victorian Information Commissioner to ask what it made of the claims that the University of Melbourne used data and images to identify the students, despite saying in 2016 the technology wouldn't be used against students. And Sean Morrison, the Victorian Information Commissioner, told us OVIC is making preliminary inquiries with the University of Melbourne regarding this matter, and that this information will assist OVIC in assessing whether or not an investigation proceeds. Also adding it would not be appropriate for OVIC to provide further comment given the preliminary nature of its involvement, and that also OVIC is unlikely to comment on where matters do not proceed from a preliminary inquiry to an investigation. And of course, we contacted Melbourne University too. A spokesperson said, "The university has established processes that we follow for incidents or reports of behaviours that may breach our policies. We follow the processes as outlined in our policies, which includes respecting the confidentiality of those involved and ensuring procedural fairness throughout these processes." We'll publish both responses in full in the episode synopsis. That's it for this morning's briefing. I'm Antoinette Lattouf. Thanks for listening.
Listener.